Have you ever had a soul wound and in the midst of trying to heal from it, suicide was an option? I have. Let's talk about it. Hey fam, what's good? And welcome to The Prompt, the show where curiosity might have killed the cat, but it won't kill the conversation. I'm your host, Damon Rich, and let's get into today's prompt. I ask you a question. Have you ever suffered a soul wound? Suffered something that was so devastating to you that as you tried to heal it, as you tried to look for the medicine for it, it seemed like the only option that was out there was suicide. That something that would just take the pain away. I want to tell you two stories. One of them is from a blog post I wrote in 2017 when I was going through the midst of some pretty significant challenges, and it just seemed to culminate with something that was pretty catastrophic in my eyes. And then I'm going to tell you about what darkness feels like and how to escape it. So let's talk. Imagine this. You see a man, he shows up in an ER. He's clutching a spot on his shirt, and underneath his hand, you can see crimson. You can see what looks to be blood. And by the way that he's clutching it, you can tell that the blood has got to be coming from him because he's clutching the wound. He's holding on to it tight. He's trying to keep more blood from coming out. And in that moment, he makes contact. He makes eye contact with the receptionist that says, "Oh my gosh." And he says, "I need help. I don't know how much longer I can hang on." And the receptionist, clearly seeing the fear and the terror and the concern in his eyes, calls for a doctor, and they rush him into a room. And the first doctor that enters the room is a woman. And she starts to ask him questions. Where does it hurt? How did this happen? And he struggles to find answers to her questions because he's not certain when it happened. He's not even sure how it happened. But he also feels like she's not asking the right question, even though he himself doesn't know what the question is, right? It's one of those situations like, I don't know what you should be asking me, but I'll know it when I hear it. So she leaves the room and she goes and gets one of her male colleagues, and he comes into the room. And he asked the same series of questions. And by now, the man is getting a little frustrated. He's getting a little upset because they're asking the wrong questions. He fears that he's going to bleed out. And finally, the male doctor says, "Tell me about your current state of being." He's like, the right question. You ever watch iRobot? And when you watch iRobot, in Will Smith's character is interacting with the hologram, and he says, "Hey, every time you ask a question, you reach the capacity of or the limitations, the boundaries of what I'm capable of giving. You've got to ask the right question." And then every time he asked the right question, he says, "Now you've asked the right question." That's how the man felt. You've asked me the right question. What is my state of being? And in answering the question, the man says 4 words. I feel alone. I feel inadequate. I feel frustrated. And I feel dangerously vulnerable. Alone, inadequate, frustrated, and dangerously vulnerable. A lot of men have that going on, and the list could probably be longer. It could probably be longer. And I can relate with this list because at the time that I was writing this in 2017, it was exactly how I was feeling. I was feeling alone, inadequate, frustrated, and dangerously vulnerable. Now I'm going to get into each one of those, and I want to do the math on that. At that time, I had been married for, let's see. Let's go. I'd been married for 19 years at that point. 19 years. Thought my marriage was good. Around that time, I found out it wasn't as good as I thought it was. I don't know if y'all are ready for real, because in this podcast, I'm going to be so transparent about my lived experiences, so vulnerable about them, that I hope that I can connect with your heart and help show you how I walked out of the pits of despair when it came to my marriage. Here's one of the things I'll go ahead and tell you. You cannot be a better spouse. You cannot be a better husband. You cannot be a better wife until you're first a better person. And at the root of my bleed out time, I still needed to become a better person. Okay. So let's talk about alone, inadequate, frustrated, and dangerously vulnerable. To be alone is already, for some of us, and I'm an introvert, so you would think I'm okay with being alone, and for the most part I am, but there's a different type of loneliness. I had a friend that would often say, man, he was divorced and he's over there and the walls closing in on him. He's like, man, you don't know what it's like to be alone. You don't know what it's like to be alone. And I said, bro, let me tell you something. There is a feeling that is worse than being alone. He said, tell me then. I said, thinking you're not, only to discover that you are, even though the room is full with people that you say you love and they say they love you. You're like, okay, I'll take my loneliness over that loneliness, because at least I know the solution to mine is to find company. What is your solution? That's a discussion for another episode. But alone is to feel like I have no one else on my team. And with what I was going through, I know as a believer, you say, oh, but you have Jesus, you have God. And I'm like, yes, where are they in this moment? I was feeling alone, like there was nobody on my team, like there was no one who was Team Damon. Alone. That kind of alone that when you speak out, you hear an echo and you get excited for a minute because you think somebody's talking to you, but it's just your own voice. That kind of alone. And then you start to feel inadequate. You start to feel like no one cares. You feel like you're not good enough for people in your life. You feel like you're not good enough for people around your life. You find yourself measuring yourself against everything just to feel adequate. And in some instances, you're measuring yourself against poop. Let me give you an example. You might be a faithful dude, and it seems like your wife gives you more hell than a little bit. But you see the guy who runs around, mistreats his wife, seem to get everything, all of the respect, all of the admiration, all of the submission, all of the love, all of the joy, all of the commitment. But he's giving his wife less. And you start measuring yourself against that when in reality, he ain't worth what she's spending on him. But you feel inadequate and you're looking for anything you can measure yourself against and feel better. Let's talk about frustrated. So now I'm alone and I don't know what to do about it and still keep my marriage. I'm inadequate. I'm feeling inadequate and I don't know how to feel more adequate. So now what am I going to do? Now I'm frustrated. Because I don't know what to do. And at the very core of a man is a desire to fix. And the problem that's in front of me, I can't fix. Frustrated. Seems like everything I try doesn't work. Everything I try is hard. I'm frustrated. Okay. And with all of that, I start feeling dangerously vulnerable. What is dangerously vulnerable? Let me tell you real life for me. Like a friend and I were talking. I said, man, I feel like my hunting instinct has kicked back on. In the midst of all of this, man, I brought, and I'm not a name brand big guy, want to have all this and draw a lot of attention to myself and different things. But I started dressing differently. Then I brought me a Mercedes, nice little Mercedes. And it did everything that you would expect a Mercedes to do. It made thirsty women realize how thirsty they was. It made thirsty women want to drink. It turned heads. And it's like, oh man, I'm feeling a little bit of intention. That's medicating that inadequacy. That's dealing with some of my frustration. That's, even though I'm not entertaining them, just the fact that they're giving me attention is starting to make me feel not as alone. And so I'm dangerously vulnerable because I don't know when's the time that I might be in the wrong mind space and step over a boundary that I said I never would. Dangerously vulnerable. You start getting out of character. You start hanging out. You start putting yourself in harm's way. I often talk about Samson, about after Samson's heart got broke the first go around, Samson became reckless with his heart. And I felt myself getting dangerously close to become reckless with my heart. Because I was alone, inadequate, frustrated, and dangerously vulnerable. Now let me tell you the second story. I'm sitting in the same studio that you see me bringing life to others. And I promise it's in Florida. It's hot out. The sun is shining. And this room literally got dark. And I had on the same amount of lighting I have on now. Now, normally I would have my backpack with me. And in my backpack, a lot of times I don't bring it to my shed, but sometimes I do. At one point, I made a habit of keeping my firearm in there. And the walls start crawling in. They start closing in on me. And the thoughts of loneliness. And this is what's crazy. I was in a really good place that day. I was in a really good place in life. Things were going in the right direction. But suddenly the four walls of loneliness, inadequacy, frustration, and dangerous vulnerability start to shut in around me, and the room got dark. And I began to cry. I didn't know how I was going to make it. I didn't know my mind had gone down a path where I was already thinking about what my baby boy would say. And I don't know why he was the first to come to my mind. And then what my daughter would say. And what my eldest son would say. How would they look at me? How would they look on the legacy of their father? Dad quit. How would they do it? Dad quit on us. And I was sitting at this same table, in this same chair. And I was thinking about quitting. And I felt the Tupac verse that came in and it said, but when I held that 9, all I could see was my mama's eyes. I saw my children's eyes. I saw my wife's eyes. I saw my friends' eyes. I saw the people that are connected to me in destiny and in purpose. And some people who are even in that moment who are holding on because they see me holding on. They see the strength of God that God has given me through some substantial trials, and they are holding on because I am. can't quit. But God, I don't want to keep going. Not like this. What do I do? I have no doubt in my mind that had my gun been near me, I wouldn't have made it out. I often tell people you have to be aware of the strategy the enemy wants to use to take you out. For most of us, just taking us out isn't enough. He has a particular way that he wants our demise. Let me back it up with scripture. He would have loved for Jesus to have bowed to him and worshiped him. It would have impacted more people for him. His secondary was to get him to the cross. And that worked in reverse. That worked against him. So sure, he'd love for you not to be here, but if he could get you to go out with adultery and suicide, if he could get you to give in to that dangerous vulnerability, then not be able to look yourself in the eyes and take your life out and people find out the whole story, whew, he loved that. And because God had given me foreknowledge of how he wanted to take me out, I feel like I heard just the faintest of voices saying, hold on just a little longer. Don't quit yet. Here's what I did after that moment to recover from being alone, feeling inadequate, frustrated, and dangerously vulnerable. The first thing is I had to find the root cause of my pain. And in order to do that, I had to go back to when I was a little boy. Oh, that's a whole nother story. I'll drop a link to a podcast episode I did about my secret child. That'll give you some insight into the little boy. But I had to go back and address things that he was still wrestling with. I had to go back and address things that had put him in the box. I had to go back and help him no longer feel alone, inadequate, frustrated, or vulnerable. I had to go back, and in part of that, this is one of the things that I found out. Ooh, it's hot in here. I had to find out this thing is my mom was my hero. That's a different podcast episode. But I was able to really help the little boy when I also embraced my mom as my villain. She went through a lot. And so when I took her down from hero status, I didn't bury her as a villain. My mom's been gone when I came to this conclusion. But what it allowed me to do is love her more in her passing than I did while she was here, because I finally understood my mom, and I finally understood some of the villainous ways that she had that impacted me as a child. But it was the best that she know how. She wasn't an intentional villain. She was a villain of circumstance. And the little boy finally got to grieve his mother in totality. Second thing I had to do is I had to stop denying what was staring me in the face. You know what that was? I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was. I lost me. I always tell people, and I want you to listen to this, the most difficult person to locate after they have gone missing is you. The most difficult person to locate after they have gone missing is you. Man, I found myself again. Not only did I find myself, I found my purpose. I ain't never letting that dude go. Anything aside from God that asks me to let go of my identity or something that I tie to my identity, I ain't letting it go. If God says it, that means it ain't supposed to be there. That it could potentially ruin his true identity for me. But I'm telling you now, if God ain't said, I'm good. Because I'm not going to lose that dude again. Because I don't think I'll find him again. And if I don't find him again, that ain't good for nobody. Can you relate? I want you to fire up the comments on this episode if you can relate to this. So I had to stare in the face. I was denying, man. I had to stare in the face that I was a people pleaser. I had to stare in the face that I was afraid to be alone. And so the only way to really to tackle loneliness is I had to get rid of that toxic feeling of loneliness and be okay, at peace with myself. I don't always have to have a voice talking to me. I had to stop denying what was staring me in the face. What truth is staring you in the face that you're fighting against? Next, I had to develop a self-care routine. You know what? And y'all can laugh at this. It's different for everybody. I used to play my video games, used to love it, and I stopped doing it. I used to read a lot. I stopped reading books. Those were my self-care routines. A lot of us don't have self-care routines. You have stuff that you do that you enjoy, but it ain't really a self-care. Let me give you an example. Like one of the things I do like to do is go out, hang with the fellas, and have me a good old fashioned. Sometimes that's therapeutic. Sometimes it exposes you to danger and you need to get your behind up and leave. But I did that at one period as a coping mechanism, so it just doesn't even feel right sometimes because it reminds me of when I was coping. So it wasn't really a self-care routine because there's times it produced anxiety. That's not self-care. Imagine going to get a massage or your feet done or going fishing and it's full of anxiety. That's no longer relaxing. You need to develop a self-care routine. You need to develop a self-care routine. Something that feeds you spiritually, something that feeds your soul, something that feeds your inner man, something that just allows you to come to full peace. Something that allows you to be in a restful state while wide awake. Find a self-care routine. See, I could put on Madden or Halo or something like that and just veg out. I ain't worried about no serious decisions, nothing. And it was just my detox. For some people, that's fishing. For somebody else, that might be going out and playing some hoops. Whatever it is, find your self-care routine. Last thing that helped me escape aloneness, inadequacy, frustration, and dangerous vulnerability is I had to develop a father-son relationship with God. Let me explain what that means. Before, I had a servant relationship with God, and I'm still his servant. But I had that servant that if I don't do right, he gonna beat me mindset because I did something wrong. But when I developed a true father relationship with him, I began to talk to him different. I began to interact with him differently. I felt like I could just climb up in his lap and tell him what was on my mind, what was going on with me. And at times he comforted me, and at times he chastened me, and at times he rebuked me, but it was always with love. So now I could hear him differently because I wasn't filtering him through inadequacy. Every time he spoke to me, I wasn't feeling, see, there I go again. I got it wrong. And I was like, my father loved me so much that he giving me stuff that's going to transform my life. He's giving me stuff that's going to grow me forward in the purpose and the plans that he has for me. He's giving me stuff that's going to move me out of frustration. He's giving me stuff that's going to protect me and not allow me to be vulnerable. He's giving me stuff that lets me know I'm not alone. Uh-oh. Yeah. I had to develop that true relationship. That was my surgery. Those were my bandages. That's what stopped the bleeding. And every now and again, I peek and I look and I see the wound, but it ain't bleeding. The scabs ain't there. It no longer hurts. I just have a reminder that I'm no longer alone. I'm no longer inadequate. I'm not frustrated. And I'm doggone sure I'm not dangerously vulnerable. So listen, I want y'all to think about and take in everything that I just shared with you. And if you're feeling alone, if you're feeling vulnerable, if you're feeling frustrated, feeling inadequate, I want you to take those 4 steps I gave you, and I want you to apply them to your life. Be diligent about it. Be persistent, and don't expect an overnight change, but know that a change will come. Listen, that's all I have for you. And remember, what doesn't get talked about doesn't get healed, and what doesn't get asked doesn't get answered. And I'll see you on the next episode of The Prompt.